Beneath the calm surfaces of America's lakes and reservoirs lies a forgotten world. Places where streets once echoed with footsteps, church bells marked the hours, and families built lives that were never meant to disappear. These were not ancient ruins or mythical cities. They were real American towns, erased not by war or natural disaster, but by deliberate human decisions. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the United States entered an age of rapid expansion. Electricity, flood control, irrigation, and drinking water became national priorities. Massive dams were planned, rivers were redirected, and valleys were marked for flooding. On government maps, these towns became obstacles, problems to be solved. Residents were told to leave. Some were compensated. Many were not. Entire communities packed their belongings under protest or heartbreak. Houses were dismantled or left standing. Churches held final services. Cemeteries were moved when possible, but countless graves were left behind, slowly swallowed by rising water. When the dams closed and the waters rose, towns vanished in silence. For decades, these places were rarely discussed. Progress had a price, and history chose not to dwell on it. But today, the truth is resurfacing. As droughts lower water levels, rooftops, roads, and foundations reappear. Divers and historians document submerged schools, bridges, and storefronts preserved like time capsules beneath the surface. These drowned towns are remembered now not just as casualties of development, but as symbols of forgotten people. Their stories challenge the idea that progress is always clean or just. By revisiting them, America is finally acknowledging the lives that were displaced and the history that was intentionally left underwater. The promise of electricity and water reshaped America's future, but it came at a hidden human cost. Across the country, rivers that once sustained small towns were targeted for massive dam projects. Officials spoke of progress, power, and protection from floods. For the people living in those valleys, it meant the end of everything familiar. In the 1930s and 1940s, federal programs accelerated dam construction at an unprecedented scale. The Hoover Dam, Grand Coulee Dam, and dozens of lesser-known projects transformed the nation's landscape. While cities lit up and industries thrived, rural communities quietly received eviction notices. Farms that had existed for generations were suddenly classified as flood zones. Families were given deadlines, not choices. Some dismantled their homes board by board, hoping to rebuild elsewhere. Others locked their doors for the last time, believing they would return. They never did. As reservoirs filled, fields disappeared, roads vanished, and town centers slipped beneath the waterline. Electricity flowed hundreds of miles away, powering distant factories and expanding cities. Meanwhile, the communities that paid the price were scattered and forgotten. Their names rarely appeared in history books, replaced by reservoir names that erased what came before. Today, when water levels drop, the remains of these towns reemerge: stone foundations, rusted bridges, and submerged fences that once marked property lines. They stand as silent evidence of a truth long ignored. America's energy revolution was built not only on concrete and steel, but on the sacrifice of entire communities whose stories were left behind, submerged along with their homes. The disappearance of America's drowned towns did not happen by accident. It was authorized, documented, and enforced through official decisions. Behind every flooded street was a signed order, a stamped letter, and a deadline that left no room for refusal. When federal and state agencies approved dam and reservoir projects, entire towns were legally condemned. Eminent domain laws allowed governments to seize land for the public good, even when residents objected. Families were summoned to town halls and informed that their homes no longer belonged to them. Compensation was promised, but payments were often delayed, reduced, or denied altogether. In places like St. Thomas in Nevada and communities along the Columbia and Tennessee rivers, relocation was mandatory. Homes were demolished or burned to prevent people from returning. Schools closed without graduation ceremonies. Local businesses were dismantled in weeks, erasing decades of community life. The most painful decisions involved cemeteries. Officials ordered graves to be relocated, but many families could not afford the cost. Thousands of burial sites were left behind, marked on maps but abandoned in reality. When the waters rose, even memory was submerged. Those who resisted were labeled obstacles to progress. Some stayed until the final days, watching survey markers appear in their yards and water creep closer each morning. When relocation trucks arrived, it was not a negotiation, it was an ending. Today, the official records remain, but the human stories were never archived. These towns were not lost to nature, they were erased by policy. Their destruction serves as a reminder that progress, when driven by authority alone, can quietly dismantle lives and call it necessity. When the waters rose, they did not simply cover land, they erased meaning. Houses that had sheltered generations disappeared room by room, as if time itself were being drowned. Curtains still hung in windows when families were forced to leave. Children's toys lay abandoned on floors that would soon become lakebeds. Churches suffered a quieter fate. In many towns, they were the last buildings to be used. Final services were held with packed pews, hymns echoing through spaces already marked for destruction. Some congregations dismantled their churches plank by plank, carrying stained glass and wooden crosses away in silence. Others were left standing, their steeples briefly visible above rising water before vanishing completely. The greatest tragedy lay in the cemeteries. Graves are meant to be permanent, but progress made them temporary. Officials ordered relocations, yet countless families lacked the money or time to move their loved ones. Wooden markers decayed. Headstones were missed. Entire burial grounds slipped beneath reservoirs, unmarked and unprotected. Decades later, divers report seeing coffins, fences, and toppled stones resting in the silt. During severe droughts, fragments resurface, a church foundation, a row of graves, a staircase leading nowhere. For descendants, these moments reopen wounds never healed. This was not just the loss of property. It was the destruction of memory, faith, and identity. Homes can be rebuilt, but submerged graveyards cannot be replaced. Beneath America's waters lie not only towns, but the unfinished grief of people who were forced to leave their past behind. For many families, the drowned towns never truly disappeared. They survived in stories, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Children grew up hearing about homes they would never see, streets that no longer existed, and neighbors whose names lived only in memory. Elderly witnesses recalled the final days with painful clarity. They spoke of surveyors knocking on doors, red markings painted on walls, and the sound of demolition crews arriving before families had fully packed. One woman remembered her father standing in the doorway, refusing to leave until the water touched the steps. Another described watching her schoolhouse collapse, knowing it would be the last time she saw her classmates together. Descendants inherited more than stories. They kept faded photographs, church programs from final services, and keys that no longer fit any door. Some families returned decades later when droughts exposed the lakebed. They walked the outlines of former homes, matching memories to cracked foundations and rusted nails. Divers and historians have recorded testimonies from families who recognized submerged landmarks through masks and murky water, a familiar fence line, a stone well, a staircase descending into darkness. These moments confirmed what official records never captured. These were living places, not empty land. Today, grandchildren and great-grandchildren tell these stories publicly, refusing to let them fade again. Their voices challenge the narrative of necessary sacrifice. Through memory, these towns breathe once more, proving that even when a place is submerged, its people are not erased. They endure, carried forward by those who remember. Some drowned towns became symbols of loss so profound that their names survived even after the water closed over them. Among the most well-known is St. Thomas, Nevada, a thriving Mormon settlement founded in the 1860s. For decades, its residents farmed the desert valley along the Muddy River. In the 1930s, the construction of the Hoover Dam sealed the town's fate. Lake Mead rose steadily, forcing families to abandon homes, schools, and a church. When drought later lowered the water, St. Thomas reemerged as silent ruins, its streets exposed once more to the sun. Further north, Celilo Falls along the Columbia River was not just a town, but a cultural center that had existed for thousands of years. Native American tribes depended on the falls for fishing, trade, and ceremony. In 1957, the completion of the Dallas Dam submerged Celilo Falls in a matter of hours. Tribal members watched as sacred fishing platforms vanished beneath the water. No compensation could replace what was lost. Other towns followed similar paths. Montezuma, Colorado, disappeared beneath a reservoir. Then Port, Oregon, was erased by floodwaters after a failed levee. Across the country, names vanished from maps, replaced by lakes bearing no trace of the communities below. These places are remembered today because they reappear, physically or culturally. Their ruins, oral histories, and protests preserved their legacy. They remind us that beneath America's reservoirs lie not just abandoned towns, but stories of resilience, displacement, and lives interrupted by decisions made far beyond their riverbanks. Even today, long after the evacuations and floods, much of America's drowned history remains untouched beneath the water. Reservoirs that appear peaceful on the surface conceal entire structures preserved in darkness. Cold temperatures and low oxygen have slowed decay, turning submerged towns into underwater time capsules. Divers have documented schools with desks still aligned, doorways opening into silt, and bridges stretching into nothingness. In some locations, glass bottles, farming tools, and handwritten signs rest where they were left decades ago. These are not museum pieces. They are frozen moments of interrupted lives. Local fishermen speak of nets catching on unseen rooftops or church spires hidden below. In drought years, water levels drop and reveal the outlines of streets, stone foundations, and rusted vehicles. Each reappearance sparks renewed interest but also unease. What else lies below, unseen? Some secrets remain unspoken. In several reservoirs, officials acknowledge that not all cemeteries were relocated. Unmarked graves are believed to rest beneath popular recreational lakes. Families know this but rarely speak publicly, fearing controversy or closure. Artifacts recovered from these sites raise ethical questions. Should submerged homes be explored or left undisturbed? Is documentation preservation or intrusion? For descendants, each discovery carries emotional weight. These underwater remnants are more than ruins. They are silent witnesses, holding truths that official histories often ignored. As long as the water remains, these towns will continue to guard their secrets, waiting for the next drought, diver, or generation brave enough to look beneath the surface. What was once unreachable is now slowly being revealed. Advances in diving equipment, underwater drones, and sonar mapping have allowed explorers to descend into America's submerged towns with unprecedented clarity. What they found was not destruction but preservation. Experienced divers describe entering intact rooms where door frames still stand and walls bear faint traces of paint. In some reservoirs, staircases descend into darkness, leading to second floors that no longer exist above water. Street layouts remain visible, as if waiting for people who will never return. Remote-operated vehicles have captured footage of church bells lying sideways in silt, school chalkboards still mounted to walls, and storefront signs legible after decades underwater. Sonar scans reveal entire neighborhoods mapped beneath lakes that millions visit each year, unaware of what lies below their boats. One of the most unsettling discoveries involves personal belongings. Shoes rest beside beds. Dishes remain stacked in cupboards. In rare cases, divers report encountering sealed rooms never entered after evacuation, their contents untouched since the day the water rose. Technology has also confirmed long-rumored truths. In several reservoirs, ground-penetrating sonar identified burial sites that were never relocated. These findings reignited debates about transparency and historical responsibility. Each dive brings mixed emotions, excitement, reverence, and unease. For scientists, these towns are data. For descendants, they are sacred ground. Modern technology did not just uncover structures, it exposed a past that had been deliberately submerged, proving that even underwater, history refuses to stay hidden. Once the waters rose, rebuilding was never part of the plan. The destruction of America's drowned towns was designed to be permanent. Reservoirs were engineered to expand and contract, making former town sites unstable and legally restricted. Returning was not only impractical, it was forbidden. Government agencies classified these flooded valleys as utility zones, protected infrastructure meant to serve distant populations. Rebuilding would have threatened dam operations, water quality, and flood control systems. Even when water levels dropped, residents were denied permits. What remained of their towns was declared unsafe, uninhabitable, or off-limits. But physical barriers were only part of the erasure. Names vanished from maps. Town records were archived, mislabeled, or quietly discarded. Reservoirs were renamed, often honoring engineers or politicians rather than the communities they replaced. Over time, guidebooks, school curricula, and public memory followed suit. Former residents discovered that legal claims expired quickly. Once compensation was issued, however incomplete, communities lost standing to demand recognition. In some cases, rebuilding elsewhere was discouraged to prevent collective memory from forming again. Silence became policy. Acknowledging these towns meant acknowledging loss, displacement, and moral responsibility. It was easier to let them fade. Today, historians and descendants fight this erasure. They restore names through oral history, digital archives, and exposed ruins during droughts. These efforts reveal a deliberate truth. The towns were not forgotten by accident. They were removed from history to protect the narrative of progress. And yet, despite every attempt to erase them, their absence still speaks louder than their names ever did. The story of America's drowned towns is more than a tale of water and concrete. It is a lesson in human priorities and justice. These towns vanished in the name of progress, yet the people who lived there were often treated as obstacles rather than citizens. Families lost homes, livelihoods, and even burial grounds, sacrifices deemed necessary by planners who rarely faced the consequences themselves. Today, these losses raise important questions. How should governments balance public projects with the rights of small communities? Were compensation programs fair, or simply a way to quiet dissent? The erasure of town names and histories reminds us that progress is not always neutral. It can carry moral costs that linger for generations. The submerged towns also serve as warnings. As climate change, dam expansions, and urban development accelerate, communities worldwide face similar risks. Lessons from St. Thomas, Celilo Falls, and countless other towns highlight the importance of transparency, consultation, and ethical planning. Ignoring human stories can lead to resentment, trauma, and forgotten cultural heritage. Yet there is hope. Descendants, historians, and divers now bring these stories to light. Through documentaries, archival projects, and educational programs, the drowned towns reclaim their place in collective memory. They remind us that justice is not just about rebuilding structures, but about acknowledging loss and learning from it. By reflecting on these submerged communities, America and the world can choose a different path. One where development does not erase history, where human dignity is protected, and where the lessons of the past guide decisions for the future.